Part 1. The Incident. Marcus Williams was a bright, driven 13-year-old who stood out for his kindness and curiosity. Raised by his mother Lydia to value integrity and perseverance, Marcus found joy in learning. He was passionate about his studies, particularly excelling in math and science, and carried himself with an impressive maturity for his age. That school year, however, Marcus's enthusiasm was challenged by his history teacher, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, an older teacher with a strict demeanor, often seemed to single Marcus out with belittling remarks. It began subtly but quickly escalated. Mr. Thompson would frequently make comments about Marcus's work, dismissing it as unsophisticated or lacking depth. One day, while going over an assignment in front of the class, Mr. Thompson held up Marcus's paper and laughed derisively. "Seems like someone hasn't been paying attention," Mr. Thompson said, shooting Marcus a look that made him shrink in his seat. The comment was unnecessary, as Marcus had worked hard on that paper. His classmates turned to stare, and Marcus felt his face heat up with embarrassment. This wasn't the first time Mr. Thompson had humiliated him in front of the class. The teacher seemed to enjoy pointing out Marcus's mistakes more than anyone else's, often with a smirk that suggested more than mere criticism. As the weeks went by, Marcus tried to let the comments roll off his back, but the experience was taking a toll. His mother noticed that he seemed quieter than usual, his once vibrant enthusiasm for school noticeably dimmer. Lydia encouraged him to share his concerns, and one night, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Marcus finally opened up. "Mom, I don't understand why Mr. Thompson doesn't like me. No matter how hard I work, it's like he's always waiting for me to mess up," Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration and sadness. Lydia listened intently, her heart aching as she heard her son recount the instances of public embarrassment. The condescending remarks and the insinuations that he wasn't capable. She'd taught Marcus to stand up for himself, but she could see how deeply this was affecting him. "This isn't right, Marcus," she said firmly. "No teacher should make a student feel this way. I'll set up a meeting with Mr. Thompson and the principal. We'll get to the bottom of this." Part 2. The Confrontation. A week later, Lydia and Marcus found themselves in the principal's office, waiting for Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Hargrove, the school's principal. Marcus clutched his mother's hand tightly, trying to hold his composure. He wasn't one to seek out conflict, but he knew this needed to happen. When Mr. Thompson entered, he barely looked at Marcus, giving a dismissive nod as he took his seat. Mrs. Hargrove sensed the tension immediately, her eyes flicking between Lydia's determined expression and Mr. Thompson's indifference. "Thank you for meeting with us today," Mrs. Hargrove began, casting a supportive glance at Lydia and Marcus. "We're here to address some concerns about the classroom environment." Lydia didn't waste any time. "Mr. Thompson, Marcus has told me about how he's been treated in your class. He's been humiliated, mocked, and unfairly criticized. I want to know why." Mr. Thompson's face reddened slightly and he stammered, "Well, I hold all my students to high standards. Perhaps Marcus just feels that pressure a bit more. Some students struggle with the workload." "Struggle?" Lydia repeated, her tone sharp. "Marcus is one of the top students in his other classes. He works hard, and I know for a fact he puts in the effort. This isn't about struggling, Mr. Thompson. This is about respect, or rather your lack of it." Mrs. Hargrove cleared her throat, trying to maintain order in the room. "Mr. Thompson, it's important that all students feel valued and supported in their learning environment. Could you provide some insight as to why Marcus might feel singled out?" Mr. Thompson hesitated, then said, "Perhaps Marcus is misinterpreting my intentions. I only want him to succeed." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "Intentions or not, the result is the same. Marcus no longer enjoys coming to your class. He's been made to feel less than, and that's unacceptable." Marcus sat quietly, but the confidence in his mother's voice gave him strength. He finally spoke up, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I work hard, Mr. Thompson. I know I'm not perfect, but I don't deserve to be humiliated in front of the class." Mr. Thompson was visibly uncomfortable, but gave a reluctant nod, mumbling something that could have been an apology. Mrs. Hargrove, however, saw the opportunity for a more formal response. "Mr. Thompson," she said sternly, "we will need to discuss this further. Every student in our school deserves a fair and supportive learning environment, and any behavior that undermines that is taken very seriously." Lydia reached over to place a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove. I hope we can work together to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Part 3. The Apology and Reflection. The following week, Mrs. Hargrove conducted a thorough investigation. She spoke with several of Marcus's classmates and even other teachers who had observed Mr. Thompson's behavior. The testimonies were troubling. It became clear that Mr. Thompson's treatment of Marcus was part of a larger pattern. Though he often hid behind the guise of high standards, his words and actions revealed a clear bias that had negatively impacted multiple students, particularly those who stood out in ways he seemed uncomfortable with. The school board decided to issue Mr. Thompson a formal warning and required him to attend sensitivity training sessions. He was also instructed to offer a public apology to Marcus in the class. The morning of the apology, Marcus was nervous but determined. Lydia stood by his side as they walked into the classroom together, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Mr. Thompson looked uncomfortable as he faced the class, his usual authority somewhat diminished. "I owe you all an apology," Mr. Thompson began, his gaze finally landing on Marcus. "Especially you, Marcus. My actions were out of line, and I did not give you the respect you deserve. I am sorry for any pain my words may have caused." Marcus listened, his heart pounding as Mr. Thompson spoke. It felt strange to hear an apology from the man who had made him feel small for so long. But as he looked around the room and saw his classmates nodding in support, he realized that this was more than just an apology for him. It was a moment of validation. As the bell rang, Lydia gave her son a proud smile. "You stood up for yourself, Marcus. That's not an easy thing to do. I hope you know just how strong you are." Part 4. A New Perspective. In the weeks that followed, Marcus noticed a change in the atmosphere at school. His classmates, many of whom had witnessed the way Mr. Thompson treated him, began to show him more respect. Some even asked him for help with assignments, acknowledging his strengths rather than treating him as an outsider. Mr. Thompson, too, changed. Though their relationship would never be warm, he treated Marcus with a newfound respect. He refrained from the condescending comments and offered constructive feedback instead. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and Marcus felt the weight he had carried all year begin to lift. One afternoon, Marcus stayed behind after class to finish an assignment. Mr. Thompson approached him, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. "Marcus, I know it's not much, but I hope we can move forward. I've realized a lot about myself in the past few weeks." Marcus nodded, accepting the olive branch. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I think we can both learn from this." With a maturity that far exceeded his age, Marcus extended his hand, and Mr. Thompson shook it, a symbolic gesture of mutual understanding and respect. Part 5. A Legacy of Strength. The experience taught Marcus invaluable lessons in self-worth and resilience. He became more outspoken, not just for himself but for others who felt silenced or underestimated. Lydia's pride in her son grew daily, and their bond only strengthened as they navigated the challenges together. In his senior year, Marcus was awarded a scholarship for his academic achievements and his dedication to promoting inclusivity within the school. He gave a speech at graduation, addressing the power of empathy, respect, and standing up for one's rights, no matter the opposition. As Marcus looked out over the audience, his eyes found Lydia's. She beamed at him, tears in her eyes, knowing that her son's courage had created ripples of change. Marcus's journey had not only transformed his own life, but had also set an example for future students. Through resilience and grace, he had shown that respect is a right, not a privilege. And though he would continue to face challenges in life, he knew he had the strength to overcome them, because he was Marcus Williams, a young man who had found his voice,